Welcome to the Talking Right podcast, a bastion of conservatism in a wasteland of progressivism. Now, here's your host, John Mosman.
Hello, everyone. This is John Mosman, and this is the Talking Right podcast. You're listening to that now on my 11th episode of Talking Right, and excited for everything that is going to definitely be happening. I think it should be exciting for anyone to think about all the things that can happen, and I'm excited for that. I said on my social media, which I'm being as sparingly on as possible to let people know, but I felt it was important to take some time. I was already planning on doing a series, and I'm going to be continuing this series. And even if I take 10-15 minutes each podcast, or if I start doing a whole podcast on it, it doesn't matter. But I wanted to start doing a series. You know, we're going to be talking about conservatism here, and we've talked about some things about conservatism. But we have to talk about another thing that's critical in understanding any kind of political ideology, and that is economics. Economics plays a huge role in everything that you see in ideology. And we can see a conflict, in my opinion, of different kinds of economic theory and strategy and ethics being played within conservatism. We have kind of a bold dividing of the line, which says, which kind of seems to me that you have the ultra laissez-faire capitalists, you have unabashed capitalists who think that capitalism is not just the best system effectively or pragmatically, but that it's also just overall there's no problems. It's just sunshine all the time. And people who tend to gravitate towards that are people who are definitely more libertarian, more lesser restrictions in government and those kinds of things. There's another side to it all that is explicitly dealing with the fact that there are conservatives like me who say, look, there's a pragmatic understanding that conservatism right now capitalism may be the most effective, but it doesn't make it the most moral, and it doesn't make it the most religiously sound economic system. And I think that's important to understand. Now, that doesn't mean I automatically advocate for socialism or communism, and I'm actually going to give my critique on those things. But what I'm saying is that there's an understanding with some within the conservative camp that understand that there are certain things at play, especially if you're going to be tending more to being a social conservative, in understanding that you just don't get to do whatever you want. And yet there is that kind of attitude within capitalism. And we'll talk more about that. But I wanted to kind of start that series off. But then the other day, recently read in Christianity Today a piece over R.C. Sproul Jr. Now, if you don't know who R.C. Sproul Jr. is, he is the son of a pretty predominant theologian. I mean, Sproul, not just senior, not just was he's still alive, was very popular, but he's definitely become a huge Calvinist theologian, and his son kind of went a little too liberal, I think. When he did, and he, of course, he was with this ministry called Legionnaire, And they suspended him until July of 2016 due to the fact that he had visited the website Ashley Madison, which happens to be a matchmaking adultery website. Legionnaire was founded by a senior who still serves as the board chair and is relatively an okay organization. They just under Sproul Jr. he's kind of taken a little bit more liberal, and there's a lot of different kinds of things going on that. But here we are. There is another quote-unquote Christian, quote-unquote conservative, his information was discovered that he had signed up at ashleymadison.com. And here we have another case of another Christian possibly seeking to do something that was adulterous. And he says in a blog post that he posted yesterday morning, that was on Sunday. He says, quote, "In a moment of weakness and pain, and from an unhealthy curiosity, my goal was not to gather research for critical commentary, but to fan the flames of my imagination. First, I felt the grace of fear. Second," which I don't know what the hell he's talking about there. The grace of fear. I'll have to look into that one. But second, I felt the grace of shame, and I was there long enough to leave an old email address. Within minutes, I left and never to return. He wrote, "I did not sign up for their service or interact with any clients. I have always remained faithful to my wife, even after her passing." Which, and I know that his wife had passed away back in 2011, I believe, for cancer. You can have another wife. That's not the issue. If he really needed companionship, he could have sought it out. There is contingencies within the Christian faith that say, look, it's understandable that if your wife dies. Now, for me, I'm engaged, and I'm looking to get married next year. And I don't think if my wife died, my future wife-to-be died, that I would seek another relationship. And I think whatever decision people make, that's fine. But the big issue here is that it was enough for him to give an old email address, as if to saying, well, it wasn't as bad because I gave him an old email address and not a new one. Well, he still went to a site and gave information to a site that is known to whether their services work or not, whether or not he encountered any of that stuff. It's a website that's known for cheating. People who go there, they know what they're doing there. They know what they're doing there when they go there. I get that he probably did have a curiosity. I know what he's talking about, a moment of weakness. Because I understand that moment of weakness. I understand it well. I have told people before, and I'm not ashamed to speak of this, but I myself have dealt with this issue. And not because of adultery, not visiting an adultery site, but of viewing porn. And I think there's this odd kind of idea that we seem to be especially shocked when pastors or high-ranking members of the Christian faith descend into this. It happened a couple of months ago with Billy Graham's grandson. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name and feel like I'm confident in doing it. But Tullian Chivadin, and he was the pastor for about 5-6 years at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, which, by the way, had another famous guy who used to run that church. And Julian was a pastor who was overall had a really good message, and he brought solid theology to a church that probably normally would not have gotten it. But back here, in June, he found out, he came out and said that he had an affair because his wife had cheated on him, and now he's getting divorced. And it's hard to understand. It's hard to say, why is it that these men of faith are struggling? Why? I want to know. As much as anyone wants to know. And we can sit around and ask ourselves, how does this happen? How do men of faith act on such selfish and immoral sexual desires? Let me tell you, they're human. They're human. And the Christian community really hasn't wanted to talk about the fact that there's a silent epidemic going on within the Christian community, especially with men, especially when it comes to affairs, when it comes to cheating. They hide that sin really well until someone comes and exposes it. And the fact that we see a lot of pastors and young religious leaders out there who are caught with porn, or caught visiting a dating site or an affair site, or whatever. You pick your poison on that. The reality is, no one should be, I guess, surprised. It is still a shock, because you'd want your pastor not to be the type of person who does those kinds of things. But they do. They're imperfect men just like the rest of us. And we have to realize that the faith isn't built and isn't determined by the sin and the imperfection of men and the immoral. And in fact, I've talked about this to a bit, and I'm going to continue, and I'm going to be writing a post on my website, johnmosman.net, about talking about this exact issue. Talking about the fact that we have to realize that we are sinners. And it seems like some people, especially in the evangelical community, who oftentimes come down on the Catholic priests for the sexual abuse scandals that have happened in the church. That's not justifiable. That's wrong. But how often have these people judged the Catholics and the Catholic Church for it? When we have seen, and I've seen like countless amount of documentaries, I've seen a lot of stories where you see pastors who cheat on their wives. And there's a sense that it's shocked, because it's so immoral and it's so wrong, and why would someone who's supposed to be for good and right do something wrong? And this just shows me why a lot of American evangelicalism or Protestantism is so wrong. Not that the Christian faith is wrong, not that their belief in Jesus Christ is off. I'm saying the established understanding here is, well, we should always be doing the moral thing. And we have to be careful. C.S. Lewis is right when he talks about we need to be taking morality out of the issue here, because the issue isn't the fact that people do immoral things. People do immoral things. But that morality is not attached to some idea that if you could just avoid it, you won't have any problems. The issue is that R.C. Sproul Jr., Josh Duggar, and anybody else who has any kind of affair or actively seeks out comfort in another woman, whether it be emotional talk or whether it be seeking out porn, And they're all the same sort of sin. And it's an easy sin to do. It's a very enticing sin to do. So much in our society and our culture, we're taught that seeking carnal pleasure is a good thing. And it is in the right circumstances. It is. It is a form of selfishness, no doubt. It is a sin. It is an immoral thing. But the reality that people are not catching on to here within the Christian faith, in that evangelical circle I'm talking about, is the understanding that these men, just like you, just like me, just like everyone, are sinners. They're sinners. And we all have our own sin to bear. St. Paul talks about this. I quote St. Paul in my piece on Duggar when he talks about, I don't do the things I want to do, and the things that I do, I don't want to do. And how do you deal with that? How do you struggle with that? Well, there is peace and comfort in knowing that Christ does forgive our sins, and that we do have redemption. But we also have to realize that instances like R.C. Sproul Jr., instances like Billy Graham's grandson, instances like Josh Duggar, they don't help. They just only span the flames of criticism from people who are anti-Christian, from people who are non-religious, atheists who do have a bone to pick with Christians, who say, how can you dare stand there and say homosexuality is wrong? How can you say these things are wrong when you're doing the same kind of wrong? You can still say sin is a sin. You can still say wrong is wrong, even if you struggle with it, because wrong is not determined by our avoidance of it. This is something that we can talk about in a future episode, talking about excuse me, the allergies today have been nasty. About all these moral issues. There's an idea that if we can just avoid them, then we're not bound by them. But we all have our skeletons in the closet, and we all have our issues. And I think what's really important here, and I'm going to be honest here, what's really important here is that we figure out something as a way to deal with this as a community, as a Christian community, because it is a problem. And we've kind of been dumb to it. We've been kind of pathetically dumb to it, and we've just put our heads in the sand and said it doesn't exist. But it does exist. I'll be back with some more in just a bit.
Like what you're listening to? Then visit johnmosman.net for much more.
Hello everyone, back here again. Sorry, I had to get my nose a little bit more sorted here. But, you know, I think it's important to consider these things, because I think that if we don't, we're in trouble. We're in trouble if we don't, as a community, say this is wrong or this is not wrong, or talking about multiple of issues. And if we're going to talk about the issue of capitalism and if we're talking about morality, then I think this is a good point to talk about morality and economics and how that applies itself. Because there's a similar thing here. There's an idea that you can have the freedom, that you can make a choice to do something. But should you? Should you? Sometimes I think we think too much about a lot of these things, about having the rights to being able to do things. You hear it a lot, actually, when it comes from more libertarian people, more laissez-faire capitalists who say, as long as I have the freedom to pursue what I have and you can pursue the freedom that you can have, then it's all good. But there's a problem. And that is, should you pursue some of these things? I, as a conservative, like a lot of things about capitalism, and I agree with a lot about the capitalism. And probably the most important thing is the concept of the free market, the concept of being able to take the power and take the ability to make decisions to people, and not be forced to do business with one group or person, not be forced to do something because the government says it or because somebody else does. The problem that we have, though, in modern-day capitalism in America is that we don't have those freedoms. We're usually given a choice between Walmart or Target, Burger King or McDonald's. Now, are there small businesses out there that can succeed? And yes, they are. But large corporations have done everything in their power to not only crash into a local economy and then put it in the ground, but then seize up all of the means in which things happen. And you see that with Walmart, where now everyone is going to Walmart because it's where they get everything, and they get everything there for cheap. And there's a sense of robbing people of their livelihood, and I think it's kind of unsettling that there are so many people out there who are conservative Christians who don't see that a lot of the current economics trends that we see lead to devaluing the family. And as a conservative, church and family should be number 1 and 2. Church and family should be the top most important things. It's like what Rick Santorum said back in 2008. He said that the church and the family are the backbone of the society, and if they're corrupted, and if they are killed off, then society collapses. And we can talk about, as Christians, the fact that we see all the problems coming from Hollywood and the gay mafia, and we see a lot of things happening from liberals where they're trying to crush all of these traditions. But we have to be honest with ourselves. You know who is doing a big share of those kinds of things? Our corporations. I don't know about you, but did you see, it was a couple of years ago, the gay Oreo? Right, it had the rainbow flag for the cream filling. That kind of has a double connotation there, if you know what I mean. But what I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to be crude here, but it is kind of ironic, isn't it, that the ones who are actually promoting a lot of the gay movement aren't these college professor anti-capitalist people. It's corporations. And the ones that we see at the forefront are companies like Coca-Cola, companies like Starbucks, companies like Apple, who say, like during the whole situation with the Freedom of Religion Act and all that, that was going on in Indiana, saying, we're not going to sell to anybody in Indiana. Well, why should someone be deprived of your product if it's so good? Why are you going to deprive people of a product that may help them out because of their moral stance? And we're seeing this now with CEOs who are allowing their own moral value structure to determine the business structure. And it's big business that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting to promoting it, And obviously you could say to some degree, maybe if they don't do it, then the gay community will attack them, which they do, because they're a very active community that does go out. And if you don't say A, B, C, or D, or whatever, they're going to come out and attack you on that. But you know, the reality of it is a lot of these corporations like the idea, right, of going and putting this kind of thing like a rainbow-colored Oreo cookie, or putting a quote about pride or marriage or whatever on a Wells Fargo bank, ad. These companies like to do it because they get away, and I think they like the idea of promoting this to that community, because then it gives them an idea that they're making money off of it. And there is a small amount of money they are making out of it. And the reality is, because of the way corporations are now, the way the market is now, it's really hard. It's harder to make choices where you can say, oh, I don't want to support that company. When you think about it, we're in the age of the conglomerate, right? I myself have been trying to not purchase and buy as many Coke products, especially Coke, because I love Coke, the taste of Coke. Coke's my favorite soda. But, and not just because of health reasons, but I also am not a big fan of the fact that Coca-Cola has, for one, given more money to Democrats than they have Republicans. But, oh yeah, those Republicans are big business and all the elite, and we're not. Okay, if anyone still buys that act, you need to get your eyes checked and your mental state checked, because you're an idiot if you believe that. If you drink that Kool-Aid, you're an idiot. But here's the thing. I don't like that Coca-Cola is pushing an ad out there. It's funny because it's like the atheists who don't want their public schools, and they don't want their public areas being filtered with religion. Well, you know what? I don't want it also filtered with pro-gay movement. And I know some atheists out there who are all into that. And you're being hypocrites about it. You are. I'm sorry. You are. I get it. And I do believe in a fair space. A space where someone can just walk into a store and just get what they want and just get what they need and go on with their life without being bombarded by religion pushing itself out there, or by some homosexual movement. It's still the same. And the ones who are feeding this are the corporations. They like it. They like that people like me get upset and riled up and start talking about why they don't like Coca-Cola, and all of a sudden, people start buying Coca-Cola. It's so funny because I was reading a chart. It was like a poll, kind of those things you read, like the top 10 best or most popular fast food restaurants or whatever. And on that top 10 list is Chick-fil-A. And you would think that Chick-fil-A shouldn't be on there. Now, I'm not talking about their good product, because they do have a good product. I'm talking about the fact that they came out openly and was perceived to be very anti-homosexual. So, why is it that they're still doing it? Well, you know what? The more people went out there and said, I don't want to buy Chick-fil-A. I don't want to buy a Chick-fil-A. It became popular there. It galvanized a lot of people who said, you know what? I support this person's right to and then they went out and did it. And I almost see the same thing happening with politics. Instead of talking about the issues, instead of talking about the fact, a scary fact, that China owns 3/4 of our debt, and that at any moment China can come in and start buying our public structures, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about the fact that, despite what Obama and others in the Democratic Party want to believe, that ISIS is as big of a threat as it is, and it is probably right now, from a foreign affairs, from a homeland security perspective, are the biggest threat to our security and our safety here in this country and abroad. Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the fact that we are continually being dependent on foreign oil. Let's not talk about the fact that at the same time we're allowing not our own companies to drill offshore of America, but we're letting French and Swedish companies do it. Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the double standards. Let's not talk about all these other problems that we have. Let's talk about the fact that we're going to continue to say that Republicans are anti-women and anti-gay, and we're going to start talking about the fact that the Democrats are anti-God and anti-freedom, and all these same yada 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 back and forth. It gets old. It gets old. And if we're going to go back to the morality and economics, this is the thing. I think as anyone who is in a business or anyone who does business with the public, you have a high standard. That high standard should be upheld, regardless of some of the feelings you may have. And I think we can continue to talk about this issue because it does bear some importance. Because I do think that from an economic standpoint, that there are certain things that while capitalism is more efficient in some ways, it has gotten too big for itself. And now we've got crony capitalism. And we mark that with crony socialism. And we have where now big government is scratching the back of big corporations and vice versa. And we should be worried about that. You know, we're told that capitalism is about the free market. But what makes a market free is that everyone that's in that market has an equal ability. And you don't necessarily get that anymore. You don't. And we're going to continue, I promise, my friends, to talk about this. Because it's important. It plays a role in everything that we're doing. And if you don't believe me, just check the news. Just look out there and you'll see it. We'll continue, and I'll be more in depth with it, but I can tell you this, that we have to be willing to just go beyond accepting what is okay, or what the government, or what is acceptable by the government, what's acceptable by big corporations, what's acceptable by us, and what we allow. If corporations and all these kind of things are allowed to do it, then we've got problems. I have to go. That's my show today. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for listening to Talking Right Podcast.